Edward deliberately poked his head out, luring the assassin on the upper floor to shoot. Once the assassin locked onto his position, Edward crouched down and quietly snuck to the side of the cover. Then he abruptly popped out and fired 2 shots in quick succession, taking out the assassin. Edward himself was an assassin who always operated in secrecy. Who would have thought that the first time he took his girlfriend out for KFC, they'd be tracked and targeted? Seeing his girlfriend trembling nervously behind him, he told her in a low voice that they shouldn't stay long and urged her to leave immediately. However, when his girlfriend actually turned to leave, he raised his gun behind her back and shot her dead on the spot. The only person who knew about his whereabouts, aside from his boss, was his girlfriend. Since someone had targeted him, the only person who could have leaked the information was her. Edward reported the situation to his boss, who arranged for him to lay low in a remote Italian town to save his life. The boss even handed him a set of car keys. Edward then drove 1,000 miles and finally arrived at that small town. However, as soon as he got out of the car, he sensed that something was off. The town's residents seemed abnormal, behaving strangely with shifty eyes, yet appearing to stare at him intently. Edward chose not to stay in town. He quickly returned to his car and immediately drove away. Along the way, he threw out the phone his boss had given him. He then headed to a different location far from the small town to stay temporarily. There, Edward had almost no contact with the outside world, only venturing out to nearby restaurants for meals. But as time passed, he inevitably felt lonely, so he used a public phone to proactively contact his boss and request a new assignment. After listening, his boss didn't say much and gave him a simple task that didn't involve killing anyone. The next day, he met with the client as instructed. The client wanted him to create a gun that had the range of a rifle, the firing rate of a submachine gun, and the accuracy of a sniper rifle. While these requirements seemed stringent, Edward was not only an assassin, but also an outstanding firearms designer. Upon hearing the requirements, he agreed without hesitation. However, he was unaware that from that moment on, new dangers had quietly descended upon him. Edward had no suspicions. The next day, he started crafting the weapon for his employer. He first purchased some gun parts online and then adjusted and assembled these components one by one. A sniper rifle was quickly assembled, leaving only the ammunition and silencer to be made. During this time, he even incidentally got a new girlfriend. But business came first. He deliberately caused trouble with his car and took it to a repair shop. While the mechanic was fixing the car, he discreetly took a steel pipe about 30 centimeters long, a drive shaft, and a few washers. After returning home, Edward dismantled the drive shaft to remove the bearings, machined the washers into the required shape, then fitted the steel pipe over the bearings and screwed on the lid, thus creating a silencer. The next day, he arranged to meet with the client to test the weapon. The two went to the edge of a small river and laid out all the components on a mat for inspection. Mary's movements in assembling the gun were skilled and experienced. Edward quietly pressed the timer on his watch. Although this was a newly configured sniper rifle, Mary didn't look at the instructions much. Her actions were quick and precise, making her seem like a veteran gun enthusiast. It even made one suspect that she, like him, might be a professional assassin. After assembly, Mary took out a target from her bag and placed it in an open area about 200 meters away. She then raised the rifle and began aiming and shooting. Seeing that the bullets were deviating, she skillfully made a few adjustments. Soon all shots were steadily hitting the bullseye. Next, Mary had Edward stand at a certain distance and gestured for him to shoot at the reeds beside her to test the rifle's silencing effect. After the test, Mary was very satisfied and requested that Edward deliver the ammunition together once it was completed. Edward gladly agreed. However, on the way home, he noticed someone following him. Since the road was paved with cobblestones and had ups and downs, Edward became alert. At a corner, he took off his leather shoes to avoid making noise, then quietly took out his handgun and circled behind the assassin. At this moment, the assassin had not yet realized that he had been outmaneuvered. Just as Edward was about to shoot, a motorcycle approached from behind, attracting the assassin's attention. In a panic, the assassin fired a shot before realizing he had fallen into a trap. He had no choice but to immediately abandon his plan and quickly flee the scene. But as the assassin hastily drove away, Edward also got on a motorcycle and chased after him. He knew the importance of thoroughly resolving the problem. Edward fired while driving. Eventually, he seized the opportunity to hit the car's tires, causing the vehicle to lose control and crash into the roadside. Edward took advantage of the situation, rushed forward, smashed the car window, and directly strangled the assassin to death. Afterwards, Edward was puzzled about how his whereabouts had been leaked. It wasn't until a date with his girlfriend that he seemed to find a clue. There was actually a small handgun hidden in his girlfriend's handbag. Could it be that she was deliberately placed by his side by someone? To find out the truth, he secretly followed his girlfriend and indeed discovered that she was in contact with a strange man who was clearly up to no good. The next day, Edward asked his girlfriend out, claiming he wanted to take her on a trip, but in reality, he wanted to find a deserted place to kill her. He drove to the edge of the small river, and his girlfriend was completely unaware. Faced with the beautiful scenery before her, she was in a great mood, gently swaying her body as she stepped into the river. Just as the opportunity presented itself, Edward hesitated. The innocent woman in front of him didn't look like an assassin at all. On the way back, he directly asked his girlfriend about the handgun and finally understood that the situation in the city had been unstable recently, and she carried the gun just for self-protection. He had misunderstood his girlfriend, but after experiencing 2 life-and-death situations, Edward had already developed thoughts of quitting and no longer yearned for that kind of life of killing. After returning home, he called his boss and expressed his intention to leave the assassin world after completing this one last job. To his surprise, the boss on the other end of the line agreed without hesitation. However, not long after hanging up, the boss contacted another assassin. This made Edward suspicious. The boss's easy agreement was a bit too casual. Thinking back to the 2 previous assassination attempts against him, he couldn't help but gasp. Nevertheless, he still completed the bullets as planned and arranged a final transaction with Mary. Just in case, Edward also brought a handgun. Subsequently, the 2 met at KFC and the transaction went smoothly. The handgun in Edward's pocket wasn't used, but he didn't know that the reason Mary didn't make a move was to lure him out like before and deliberately let him lower his guard. After he left, Mary quietly followed, found a good position, and locked onto him with the sniper rifle that Edward had made himself. Just then, his girlfriend unexpectedly appeared, which was undoubtedly a golden opportunity for Mary. However, after the gunshot, the one who fell wasn't Edward because he had tampered with Mary's gun beforehand. Hearing the gunshot, Edward immediately instructed his girlfriend to wait for him by the small river, then ran towards the direction of the sound. At this point, Mary was already critically injured. Edward hurriedly asked her who had sent her. When he heard the other party mention his boss's name, he wasn't surprised. He then left straight away, preparing to head to the small river to meet up with his girlfriend. On the way, he vaguely felt someone following behind him, so he decisively turned around and fired a shot. The person was none other than his boss. Edward didn't pause and quickly got in the car, heading straight for the small river. On the road, he had a pained expression. When he saw his girlfriend by the river, he finally couldn't hold on any longer. It turned out that in the earlier exchange of fire, his boss had also hit him.
Edoardo!